Hi, everyone. If you're anything like me the last few weeks, your regular laundry cycle has surely been deeply disrupted. If you're like most of us not working outside of the house, then chances are you're not wearing what you normally would be wearing every day when you get up and prepare to go to work. For me, it's meant that actually most of the laundry I've been doing the last few days and certainly the last few weeks has been the kind that goes in the dryer, which means that most of what I've been wearing has not been work clothes or clothes that I would normally hang up or want to preserve. And that's strange. Perhaps nothing seems stranger than having such a big disruption to the regular laundry routine. And it's something I'm sure many of us have experienced because it doesn't really matter what you wear on Zoom, although it's good if you dress appropriately. It's a very different thing to present ourselves to the world digitally in the confines of a tiny webcam screen than it is to present ourselves in analog in the world around us, walking around every day. And in particular, it's appropriate to think about that this week when Parashat Tsav, which we would be reading tomorrow, and I encourage you to read at home, talks a lot about the ordination of the Kohanim, the priests, and in particular, the rituals of how they get dressed for their ordination. There's a bunch of layers to what they need to wear, and probably most of it wasn't machine washable. They started out with linen breeches, which they would put on, something which wasn't terribly common, probably kind of half trousers made from pure white linen. And they put over the top of that a coat made of pure white linen. And they tie that with a sash as well, so that it was all closed. And then over that underlayer, they would put on a robe, which was probably made out of threads, which were dyed with techelet, that bright blue that's in our tzitzit. And the robe would go on over the linen vestments. And then on top of the robe, they would put another layer called the ephod, which is like an apron made out of multicolored threads. And they would tie the apron, the ephod, and the robe together, all on top of the linen vestments underneath. And then on top of the robe and on top of the apron, they would put a breastplate made out of precious stones, and which had a little pocket in it where they would put the two stones of divination, the umim and tumim, which the priest would consult. The breastplate would be tied over their shoulders using gold chains and hang on top of these other many, many layers, adorned with gold, and at the very bottom of the robe with little golden pomegranates like bells that would ring when the priest walked. On the priest's head, he would have had a white linen turban wrapped around his head, and then a gold circlet in the front which said, "Holy to the Lord." And all of that would have been put on when the high priest did his initiation ceremony, as we read about it in the Torah portion. It seems both like a very heavy amount of clothing to be wearing, especially when one is doing something as athletic as sacrificing animals all day, but also quite warm in the conditions of ancient Israel. But the clothes weren't chosen for practicality. Actually, they were chosen for the opposite of practicality, because if you wanted to have practical clothing for sacrificing animals in the desert, you wouldn't use white linen, and you certainly wouldn't use expensive dyes and materials like gold and like techelet and like some of the other colors that are used in the garments. And in reading about the initiation ceremony in our parasha, you read that when the priest would be inaugurated into the priesthood, there would be a sacrifice of an animal, and its blood would be sprinkled all over them in their shiny new garments. And olive oil would be sprinkled all over them in their shiny new garments. Seems like the last thing you would want to do if you're wearing all of that good kit. And yet, maybe that's partially the point, is that for the Israelites, they dressed up their priests just like every else around them dressed up their priests. Probably the description of the high priest in Leviticus is a lot like that of other ancient Near Eastern cultures and how their priests dressed. We see some of it in Egyptian sources, some of it in Babylonian sources. Clearly, it wasn't so different. But what may have been different is the fact that we go through this whole routine of dressing up the priest and all these expensive materials and rare threads, and then we shower him in blood and oil. And maybe it's meant to undermine the significance of garments, because for so many of us, you are what you wear. And the priest was dressed like that in many cultures to try and be imposing, to try and show that they were more important than other people. But the great equalizer is that in order for the priest to be inaugurated, has to get really dirty, splattered with blood, covered in oil, and ultimately unable to preserve that illusion that clothes can create. The equalization of that is probably more profound than we realize in reading Leviticus. And it's something which we probably have experienced recently. It doesn't really matter what you wear right now. Hopefully you wear trousers on every Zoom call, just in case you stand up. But truth is, the distance that's created by digital technology means that no one's really that fussed. And in a lot of ways, that's good, because it creates the equalization between people, allows them to interact without worrying about how they present themselves. Other than this small square of video, you can't really know much about what people look and feel like. And in a lot of ways, that's good, because like the priesthood in ancient Israel in our parasha, probably it does us well to undermine at times the power that clothing can have, and the control and impression that can be made through having the best looking clothing, whether that's the fanciest name brands or whether it's a whole bunch of layers of white linen, specialty threads, techelet, argaman, and tolat shani, and topped all off with a turban and a gold circlet. A bit gaudy, but it seemed to do the trick. Shabbat shalom.